200 transit papers forged inside the machinery of a death camp, yet the man who printed them did not even have fingers to hold a pen. In the freezing barracks of the Auschwitz-Monowitz industrial complex, cold iron gears ground relentlessly, while a Swiss artisan with a prosthetic steel hook quietly unpicked the machinery of the Reich. How does a watchmaker with half a hand systematically dismantle the paperwork of genocide right under the noses of the SS, and why did history leave his name out of the ledgers? To understand Marcel Lother, you have to understand the strange, brutal mathematics of the Buna-Werke. In the autumn of 1942, the sprawling industrial complex rose from the Polish marshland like a concrete monolith to the madness of total war. IG Farben poured billions of Reichsmarks into synthetic rubber and fuel, demanding endless labor from skeletal men whose lives were measured in weeks. Into this grey purgatory stepped Marcel Lother. A native of Basel, Switzerland, Lother was a master horologist whose precision was legendary. Before the borders slammed shut across Europe, his workshop in Bern had supplied delicate escapement mechanisms to the Swiss railway system. But when the Reich annexed industrial supply chains, Lother's specialized metallurgical expertise made him dangerously valuable. The SS did not care about his politics, they cared that he could repair the intricate optical timing devices, pressure gauges, and machine tools that kept the camp's armaments factories humming. They gave him a pass, a warm coat, and a small, secure workshop on the periphery of the administrative zone. They did not know that years earlier, during a forgotten border skirmish in the Great War, a mustard gas shell had claimed his right hand, leaving him with a jagged steel hook that he had mastered with terrifying dexterity. With that hook, Marcel Lother could disassemble a Swiss chronograph in the dark in under 4 minutes. And soon, he would use those same mechanical fingers to construct an underground escape network. Life inside the camp perimeter was an exercise in systematic starvation and terror. Every morning at dawn, the roll call began, a grueling ritual of numbers where men stood freezing in the mud while SS guards counted the living and the dying. Among these men was Albert Suski, a former Polish cavalry officer in Jewish commando whose defiance had landed him in the darkest depths of the quarantine block. Suski was a man of cold, sharp intellect, a survivor who had watched his entire unit dissolved into smoke. When Suski was assigned to the maintenance detail that serviced Lother's workshop, he expected another routine encounter with a privileged civilian technician. Instead, he found a man whose posture radiated a quiet, dangerous calm. The first encounter between them was silent. Lother sat bent over a workbench illuminated by a single brass-shaded lamp, his steel hook deftly manipulating a pair of tweezers to place a microscopic gear into the heart of a lathe timer. Suski stood by the door, his hands trembling slightly from the biting cold, holding a crate of heavy brass valves. Lother did not look up immediately. He finished seating the gear, tested the mechanism with a soft, metallic click, and then raised his eyes. They were pale blue, remarkably steady behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Without a word, Lother slid a small piece of bread wrapped in greasy butcher's paper across the edge of the workbench. Suski stared at the bread. A heavy swallow caught in his throat, his jaw tightening as he fought the sudden, humiliating surge of tears. He did not reach for it instantly, he locked eyes with the Swiss watchmaker, assessing the risk, before sliding his rough, gray-skinned hand forward to take the offering. That single piece of bread was the ignition spark of an alliance that would defy the SS security apparatus. Over the following weeks, the basement workshop became an unlikely sanctuary. While SS guards patrolled the freezing corridors outside, inside the room, the air smelled of machine oil, ozone, and hot solder. Lother utilized his privileged status to move freely between the administrative sector and the outer labor sites. Because he was a Swiss national, a citizen of a nominally neutral state whose economic ties the Reich still depended upon, the camp guards treated him with a wary, bureaucratic indifference. They did not search his toolbox with the same savage thoroughness they applied to the Polish inmates. Lother quickly realized that the camp's administrative machinery was bloated, chaotic, and heavily reliant on forged rubber stamps and carbon copy transit papers. Transfers were constantly happening, sick workers being sent to auxiliary subcamps, technical specialists being reassigned to munitions depots further west, and construction crews moving between compounds. The paperwork was a bureaucratic labyrinth, and where there is bureaucracy, there are vulnerabilities. Lother began smuggling blank transit forms into his workshop, hidden inside hollowed-out wooden crates that supposedly contained precision watch springs. But forging a document in a Nazi concentration camp required more than just paper. It required ink matching the specific chemical composition used by the camp commandant's office, authentic rubber stamps, and a deep understanding of the ever-changing transit codes. This is where Suski's inside knowledge became critical. Working in the administrative sorting office during night shifts, Suski memorized the signatures of the camp adjutants, the specific stamp rotations, and the daily clearance passwords. By day, they communicated in cryptic fragments disguised as repair discussions. A broken escapement meant a missing signature, a misaligned gear indicated a flawed stamp impression. Using his steel hook with surgical precision, Lother carved makeshift rubber stamps out of discarded rubber gaskets, vulcanizing them over the blue flame of a blowtorch until the impressions matched the official SS seals with terrifying accuracy. The physical toll of the operation was immense. Lother's chronic respiratory issues, a permanent souvenir of the same gas attack that took his hand, often left him fighting for breath in the damp, unheated corners of the workshop. He would press his back against the cold concrete wall, his chest heaving silently, his jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached, waiting for the paroxysm to pass before returning to the meticulous work of forging another man's salvation. Suski, meanwhile, coordinated the movement of the escapees from the inside. Selecting who would receive the papers was an agonizing gamble. They could not save everyone. An exodus of hundreds would trigger an immediate, catastrophic audit. The operation had to be surgical, almost invisible, a steady, imperceptible draining of men from the doomed rosters. They focused on young men like Suski, commandos, and partisans who possessed the physical resilience to survive the journey through the hostile Polish countryside once they crossed the wire, and older men whose death sentences had already been signed by the camp doctors. The first test of the network came on a freezing Tuesday in November. A prisoner named Joseph Myler, scheduled for extermination at Birkenau the following morning, was given a forged transfer order naming him as a specialized welder being reassigned to a heavy machinery depot in Silesia. Lother handed the document to Suski inside a hollowed-out copper manifold. Suski delivered it during the chaotic shift change at the main gate, where the sheer volume of exhausted laborers often overwhelmed the sleepy, bored guards on duty. The tension in the workshop that afternoon was suffocating. Neither man spoke. Lother sat motionless at his bench, his steel hook resting idly beside a dismantled stopwatch, while Suski stood by the window, his fingernails digging deep into his palms until the skin broke. Hours passed in agonizing silence. If the forgery was discovered, both of them would be dragged to Block 11, the torture block, within minutes. The sun dipped below the barbed wire fences, casting long, bloody shadows across the frozen mud. Then, a sharp knock echoed on the heavy oak door. It was not the SS, it was a sympathetic Polish runner bringing the returned carbon copy, stamped with the transit clearance seal. Myler was gone. He had slipped through the outer gates on the back of a coal truck, disappearing into the vast, dark expanse of occupied Poland. Over the next 14 months, that single successful escape multiplied into a coordinated underground railroad operating inside the jaws of the beast. 200 men walked out of Auschwitz-Monowitz using Marcel Lother's forged papers. 200 human beings who should have turned to ash instead found their way to partisan units in the forests of the Świętokrzyski Mountains. Suski managed his own name near the top of the final roster, but when his moment came, a terrible moral dilemma paralyzed him. He looked at Lother, knowing that the Swiss watchmaker was now dangerously exposed. The sheer volume of missing men had begun to trigger whispers among the SS camp command. Gestapo investigators were sniffing around the industrial zone, looking for leaks in the transit office. Suski whispered an urgent plea for Lother to drop his tools, to use his Swiss passport to cross the border before the net closed. But Lother shook his head with quiet finality. He pointed to a half-repaired chronometer on his bench. The delicate gears were still scattered, waiting for their final adjustment. Lother's voice was barely a breath above a whisper as he told Suski that a watchmaker does not leave a mechanism half-wound. Suski's throat tightened into a hard knot. He swallowed the lump of grief rising in his chest, gripped the Swiss artisan steel hook in a fierce, trembling handshake, and stepped out into the snow for the last time. The end, when it came, was as swift and brutal as the regime itself. In January 1945, as the Soviet offensive rolled across the Vistula River and the chimneys of Auschwitz roared day and night to burn the evidence of mass murder, the Gestapo finally pieced together the transit discrepancies. Lother's workshop was raided at midnight. SS officers kicked the heavy oak door off its hinges, finding the room empty of people but littered with the damning physical evidence of forgery, chemical inks, vulcanized rubber stamps, and the meticulous ledger of names that Lother had kept hidden inside the casing of an old grandfather clock. Marcel Lother was arrested, interrogated in the freezing cells of Block 11, and subjected to brutal torture designed to extract the names of the remaining network members. He broke under the physical trauma, but not in the way the SS expected. He never gave a single name. When the camp was liberated days later by the Red Army, Lother's body was found in a mass grave behind the industrial sector, beaten beyond recognition, his steel hook still clutched in the frozen mud beside his shattered fingers. History has a way of sweeping away the small, precise details in favor of the grand, sweeping tragedies, leaving men like Marcel Lother in the shadows of the archive. But true resistance is rarely forged in grand speeches or battlefield heroics. Often, it is hammered out in the quiet dark by ordinary people using the exact tools the oppressor gave them to survive. If stories like Marcel's and Albert's deserve to be rescued from the dust of the past, take a moment to subscribe, leave a comment below telling us which forgotten hero you think we should uncover next, and share this video so their names are never lost to time again. In the end, the iron gears of the Reich rusted away into the Polish soil, but the tiny, fragile escape of 200 men remains ticking quietly in the ledger of time, a testament to the fact that even with a broken hand, a watchmaker can dismantle an empire.